Today's video is sponsored by Grammarly. Fall Guys. Probably a name you haven't heard in what, like 6 weeks? Because yeah, it was actually less than 2 months ago that Fall Guys was the king of the gaming scene. It's crazy to think just how fast things can change. On August 4th of 2020, the gaming community had been given a new casual battle royale wipeout course game, complete with jelly beans and all, and it spread like wildfire. For 1 month, Fall Guys Ultimate Knockout was the rage of the internet. Twitch, Reddit, YouTube, you name it, we were obsessed with this game. And of all the hype, nothing was bigger, of course, than Tim the Tatman's iconic journey to his very first win.
It took a long time, but I finally got my first win in Fall Guys.
Tim, you got this!
Nice and easy.
Let's go! You said it couldn't be done! There's the king! Put my crown on!
This, in my opinion, was probably the peak of Fall Guys, come to think of it. I'm getting nostalgic just talking about it, and it was, again, not even 2 months ago. And yet, despite all that, here we are, sitting in October, where it's hardly a blip on anyone's radar, apart from the 9 people watching this video on how the game died. Hi there, all 9 of you. Anyway, hey, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. Today, we will be going back, analyzing, and dissecting the sharp decline of Fall Guys to find out exactly where and when it went wrong for this game. By now, you all know and probably participated in the rise, but in this video, we will be looking at the fall of Fall Guys. But first, a quick word from our sponsor. So it's currently October, most of you are back to school, and this means that you're probably in the middle of test, midterm, and essay season. And today's sponsor is something that can help with that. And that is Grammarly, a digital writing assistant. The free version of Grammarly acts as a basic spelling and grammar checker, but the premium version takes this even further, providing vocabulary suggestions and conciseness. It also has a plagiarism detector and can even help perfect your sentence structure. What's going on, guys? It's Patrick here. When I was a student, I was incredibly busy between both YouTube and school, and having something that could have helped me on my essays would have been truly valuable. Fortunately, it is something I can now... Oh, wait, I think I could say that sentence a little bit better. Fortunately, it can help me write more intricate and concise scripts for Zombies Retrospective. Nailed it. So if that sounds interesting to you, you can follow the top link in the description at grammarly.com/TheSmithPlays to sign up for a free account or get 20% off premium. And now, with all that said, let's get into it. So, where do we start with this one? Well, I think there's certainly a few commonly brought up reasons as to what killed Fall Guys. The first and most common thing I heard was that it was actually a new game that killed it, Among Us. While Among Us certainly highlighted Fall Guys' descent from grace, I don't think this is the reason we can say it, quote, died. All the time, we see that games are able to coexist, even in the same genre. Take Fortnite, Warzone, and Apex Legends, for example. So while this would be an easy argument to make, it's shallow and incomplete. Another common argument that has been made is coming straight down to hackers ruining the game. While hackers can make a game worse, I don't believe that this either was a huge reason for the game's decline. Mediatonic was actually pretty quick to ban hackers, and in general, this usually isn't something to deter someone from playing a game entirely. While it may have been one of the many things on the camel's back, I wouldn't argue that it was even the one straw to break it. No, I would actually argue that what killed Fall Guys was itself. Despite it being a genius concept, Fall Guys had a seriously flawed set of stages to begin with, so the series started with the need to play catch-up from day one. And so the second problem with the series was that from the initial launch, the game then failed to make these necessary changes. This ultimately then led to stagnation and disinterest. Now, lastly, I do just want to note that Mediatonic is a small team, and I don't think they were prepared for the success of Fall Guys. And really, they probably still aren't, and probably aren't even looking to manage an Empire-type game. So, maybe that's not even what they want. But with that in mind, I'm going to be dissecting the problem with the game from the perspective of someone who genuinely loved the series and is sad to see that they themselves fell out of love with it. So anyways, let's proceed. So as I said, Fall Guys was a strong concept of a game to begin with. The general underlying formula of Fall Guys was strong. It was casual, addictive fun. And while it took off, it wasn't able to last. And I think actually a main part of the problem was that from the very start, there were issues. Fall Guys launched with a total of 25 stages, but quickly became 25. At first glance, that sounds pretty good, but as we look deeper into it, we realize there's less. 3 of these stages are tail tag, so that knocks it down to 23, and there were also 2 variants of Jump Club, so really we started with 22. But even if we were to count all 25, very modestly, only 13 of these stages were widely considered to be loved. And so then doing the math there, that means that almost 50% of experiences in this game were not necessarily and unanimously going to be a good time for people. Before we even get into the nitty-gritty, I don't like those odds. So the first and most predominant group of stages in Fall Guys were the race stages. This was easily the most beloved set of stages in the game, and I counted all of these stages in the 13 that everybody liked. Races included stages like Dizzy Heights, Hit Parade, DoorDash, and Gate Crash as the beginning stages. But it also had some later banger stages like Tiptoe, Fruit Shoot, and the iconic Slime Climb. Actually, take back Fruit Shoot. I hate Fruit Shoot. Overall, though, these race courses were what made Fall Guys successful in the first place. These were the stages we would see the most often, and these were the stages that were overall the least criticized. First, this was because the stages were actually enjoyable. Dude, I could play DoorDash literally all day. It's just constant, ridiculous fun. It's satisfying. But the second and more important reason was simply because these games were fair. When you lost on one of these stages, you knew that in a large part it was due to your own faults, and so it was never discouraging. On the other hand, improving at the game was rewarding because, well, you'd succeeded, move on to the next stages. It was in a large way these Stage 1 and Stage 2 courses that really made Fall Guys palatable to begin with. But on top of that, they also kept you enjoying it. The next group of stages generally fell between Stage 2 and 4 and were received less positively than race stages, but weren't entirely intolerable either. These were the survival stages. I think as a whole, these stages didn't suffer because they were unfair, but just quite often it was that they were actually boring. Rollout, the game where you move back and forth on spinning tubes, at first posed an interesting challenge, but after mastering this stage, it became incredibly tedious as you spend your time waiting for other players to fail. It wasn't intense enough to fully engage you, and so this would often be one of the first lulls in excitement. Block Party, while more exciting, seemed to be another mode that simply just went on for far too long. It was okay, but also failed to get me overly excited. Tail Tag was generally a pretty despised mode, but I actually will defend it. For the most part, Tail Tag came down to skill, and so it's not an unfair game mode outright. The problem with this mode was that nothing mattered up until the last 20 seconds of the game. You could play a perfect match up until the last second, in fact, and only lose it in the very last one. The system as a whole was flawed, and really it should have played so that tails start on the ground neutrally, and the top half of the lobby that managed to keep their tails for the most amount of time should have progressed. This would have kept the excitement, but made it more balanced. Now, Jump Club was an overall solid concept, and really I would say the best of the survival stages. Short, sweet, and super engaging. But lastly, this brings me to Perfect Match. Really just an absolute bore. This mode was so easy that it shouldn't have even existed. Memorizing even the final round was quite simple, and even if you didn't want to do the work, you could just rely on other players' memories, and 90% of the time, you would make it through. So overall, the survival modes represented a lull in the action. They were less exciting than the first wave of races and failed to reward players. Actually, I think a big part of this was that unlike with races, you weren't satisfied because you weren't actually beating people. Rather, instead, you were just making it through. And so it didn't really feel like you achieved as much. And this was actually made worse as players who exited the game early would not be shown in the progression section. Remember those games where it would show 0 people being eliminated because they had all quit already? I think deep down psychologically, that wasn't good for rewarding players. Just wasn't rewarding. Now, the next section of games we have are team games, and this was by far the most frustrating and controversial point of Fall Guys. While some of these modes actually proved to be incredibly engaging, like Fall Ball and Hoopsie Daisy, the mortal sin of team games were that they were incredibly unfair. Which makes sense. Like, the concept of a team game in a single progression battle royale has to be flawed. And this is because players have little control of whether they actually get to progress or not. Take a mode like Team Tail Tag, for example. The goal of this game is to have the most amount of tails at the end of it. As a single player, literally the best you can do is have a single tail. And so that means that you can do the best possible job you can do and still lose. Conversely, you cannot finish with the tail, doing the absolute worst you can do for your team and progress. It was an entirely flawed system that does nothing to promote skill and really only discouraged you when you lost. But let's look at another example. Jinxed. The goal of this mode was to make the other team completely jinxed before your team was. Now, think about how that actually works though. The sooner you lose, that is, get jinxed yourself, the sooner you can start helping your team by making the other team more jinxed. The way the mode was designed ultimately makes it so that it usually comes down to both teams always having a very similar number of players at the end. Like, if one team starts out by doing really good, that means the other team is going to get more jinxed. That then leads to that team jinxing the other team more, and so it really balances out until the very end, where it's usually 3 to 4 people on each team left, with the outcome going down to chance. And obviously, what's worse about this mode is that it was a 50-50 game, so your odds of getting booted were extremely high. Now, next up, you've got Fall Ball, and while it actually was an incredibly fun game, it still saw a similar problem. It was extremely frustrating to make it to stage 4 and then lose in a Fall Ball game because you had a bad team. But nothing came close to the absolute horror, which was Egg Scramble. So awful, this game coined a new phrase called bully culture. Basically, the best way to secure a win in Egg Scramble was that after the first wave of collection finished, all you do is try to make the team that has the least eggs lose. Both the first and second team play slowly learned to do this, and so if you happen to be unlucky from the start, your odds of winning plummeted. Everyone from the other two teams would just pick on you and you were guaranteed a loss. Hoarders also worked very similarly to this, but it was so much more random that one may even be able to call it worse. Like, do you ever remember winning a Hoarders game where you looked back on and thought, wow, I really did a lot to help my team there? No, it was always completely random. In fact, neither of these modes had much strategy, so really they just made for awful experiences.
Dude, none of our team is on defense.
Ugh.
This is F. It's over. Yeah.
And so, after all that, you'd find yourself in the final stage. Most of the time, you were going into a fair competition, whether it be Royal Fumble, Jump Showdown, or the beloved, and should I add, greatest stage in Fall Guys, that's Hexagon. All of those stages were great. 3 of the 4 final stages were truly balanced in my opinion. Fall Mountain, however, was not. Yeah, Fall Mountain, I think it's fair to say that was a bad stage. And the reason being is twofold. 1, it's a stage that involves high levels of luck, but 2, this effect is compounded because it's a finisher. Let me say this very clearly. While it may be okay to throw in some randomness and lucky aspects in a few mid stages, a finale map that appears 35% of the time should not be predominated on luck. Even top tier players who excelled at Hexagon were never able to guarantee a win in this, as a random, unlucky ball can easily ruin everything. One bad move on Fall Mountain means a loss. Fall Mountain was a huge failure, and ultimately it represents the second problem with the series. So, as a game, you make it big. Despite some very clear flaws, people put up with a lot of these issues and you now have room to grow. From here, if I was Mediatonic, I think what your main focus should have been is to sort yourself out, self-assess, and see where the problems lie. And I really think they failed to do so. While we saw some small changes, like you can't get 2 team modes back to back and tail tags is 30 seconds shorter, fall ball can't be played with uneven teams, I believe these were only band-aids on much deeper wounds. So I think really to start with, in the first few weeks, we should have got some major updates. First, names should have been able to be displayed on PC. It's a small thing, but was a sign of what was to come. Hacking also could have still been dealt with better. Team modes needed to see way more workarounds than they did. Like, instead of just limiting them, maybe perhaps they could have made it so that the top player from the losing team would not be eliminated. And hey, maybe even the worst player from the winning team. But obviously, of course, most importantly is Fall Fall Mountain. Fall Mountain saw no improvements. It really should have just been removed. Like, ironically, Fall Mountain actually would have been a great first stage. Instead of having to go for the crown, just make it so that when you reach that upper area, that's the finish line. Literally, I feel like there are so many of the first race stages that actually would have worked better as finales. Whirligig would have been more fair. Slime Climb, absolutely. Honestly, I would even take Gate Crash, but instead we were stuck with Broken Fall Mountain. But moving on from this idea, I think the even bigger problem was the actual new content introduced. Not only were things not fixed, there was just very little added. Of those things, it was updates like the Big Yeetus, which literally just added a single spinning hammer to the map. I don't really think things like this should be considered new content, especially when the game still has existing flaws. Overall, hardly anything was added in, and many of the problems remained. Fall Mountain saw no improvements, team games still plagued the mid-rounds, and as all this continues, players' interest declined with no new maps. You can only play the same stage over and over so many times, and it's very obvious that this is what killed Fall Guys. As the weeks rolled by, no new stages were released, and players got progressively more bored until they quit. Now, perhaps it's too much to suggest that the team should have been dropping new stages on the weekly like Epic Games was doing with Fortnite, but at the very least, surely they could have started adding in stage variants. Like, say, Slime Climb. Same concept, but just with some variations. Now, in my opinion, Fall Guys actually should have been adding new stages almost every week. I know it's a huge request, but again, I'm just arguing that if you want to stay relevant, you have to look at a game like Fortnite that was king at updates. And so I really do think they could have done more. Actually, I've seen various videos on Reddit where individual developers made their own stages, and they look incredible. These are great concept maps that by all logic could and should have easily been introduced into the game. Yet despite all this, they added very little, and so my interest dipped off. But despite that, I'm sure you can imagine my excitement when I heard new stages were going to be introduced in Season 2. Now, I was really hoping that Season 2 was going to show a massive overhaul, and I was really sad to see that it wasn't the case. Season 2 introduced 4 new stages to the 25 existing stages. 4. So, okay, 4, fine, whatever. They better be good then, right? Wrong. So, first off, we saw Night Fever. Basically a new simple race game. I really enjoyed this map, actually. It was something fresh for the first time in ever, and while nothing mind-blowing, it served as a great change-up in the gameplay. Wall Guys was the second race stage added, and it too was a huge success. An entirely new concept. This had players working together to push platforms and manners so that you can climb up them and jump over increasingly higher walls. This was by far the best edition of Season 2. Sadly, however, it gets rough from here. Hoopsie Legends was the new survival stage added, and as you may be able to guess, it's an individual version of Hoopsie Daisy. While actually a pretty fun mode, it's pretty unoriginal, especially considering that, again, there were only 4 total new courses. And lastly, we have Egg Siege, a remake on one of the most hated stages of all time, Egg Scramble. Now, granted, Egg Siege is actually a significantly improved stage. The overall map design is more complex and exciting, and the egg baskets are 3 to 4 times as deep, which does help to prevent bullying. That said, it's still a remake, and so when you consider that there were only 4 stages, it's still disappointing in my opinion. So yeah, Season 2 saw 2 new stages and 2 remakes. Worse, however, was that these stages were not even weighted significantly higher than the old stages in the playlists. So you had a 4 out of 29, or about 15% chance of actually getting them. Players who were eager to hop into a new season didn't even get to play much of the little new content there was. And worst of all, not only was there no new finale stage, Fall Mountain continued to exist, only marginally different. Season 2's release was a huge failure, and it marked the nail in the coffin for my enjoyment with this game. And so, yeah, is that what killed Fall Guys? I certainly believe the main problem with the game was lack of improvement. Fall Guys became successful because it was an amazing concept to begin with. The underlying details and individual modes, however, were not perfect. And while they could have easily been worked on, we just didn't see that. And when we finally did get an update, it was too little, too late. So yeah, I think it really did simply come down to a bad initial launch and a failure to improve upon it. Fall Guys was a game I was in love with, and I'm super disappointed that it fell off. I would have loved to see weekly new stages added, or even weekly changes, which based off of those Reddit videos I showed, could have been entirely possible. Perhaps this might not have been sustainable, but it's what I personally would have needed to stick with the game. Regardless though, I think it's safe to say that with the most recent content update, Fall Guys has shown a failure to adapt, and I don't believe we will see a resurgence in this game. I'm sure a lot of you guys disagree with me and are okay with the way the game is, and I totally respect that. Enjoy what you want to enjoy. Personally, however, I was just hoping for a lot more from one of my favorite games in the last few years. And for those of you in my boat, all I think we can do is be happy that it existed at all. August was a great month, and a huge part of that was truly because of Fall Guys. Search for great content on my second channel as well as fun times with friends. And so Fall Guys will still always be a game I look back on and admire. And who knows, maybe the next update will be better. But for now, I'm not gonna hold out much hope. Fall Guys was a great game, and yet despite the huge knockout blows it delivered to the game community in the first round, I'm sad to say that Fall Guys, in the end, ultimately fell off. Bam, you like that? Ultimately fell off. Fall Guys ultimate knockout ultimately fell off. Haha. That's just for you, Roman. Don't include that. All right, boom. There we go.